It was a cold, foggy night when I picked up my last fare. As a seasoned taxi driver in the bustling city, I've seen my fair share of odd passengers, but none like the one that night. He appeared at the curb as if materializing from the mist, a tall, lanky figure cloaked in a tattered overcoat. His face was obscured by the hood, and all I could see were his piercing, ice-cold eyes. "Drive," he said, his voice a chilling whisper, as he settled into the back seat. There was no destination, just a command. The city lights flickered as I navigated through the empty streets, the silence in the cab heavy and oppressive. I tried to make small talk, but he remained silent, his gaze fixed out the window. The further we drove, the more the city seemed to distort around us. Streets I knew like the back of my hand twisted into unfamiliar paths, and the dense fog turned the world outside into a ghostly landscape. The air in the car grew colder and I shivered, a sense of unease settling over me. Without warning, the man spoke. "Stop here," he commanded, his voice sending shivers down my spine. We were in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by the thick fog. I hesitated, but something in his tone made me comply. I stopped the car, and when I turned to ask for the fare, he was gone. Vanished without a trace. In his place, on the leather seat, lay an old, rusted pocket watch. Its face was cracked, and it ticked in a slow, ominous rhythm. Puzzled and unnerved, I picked it up. That's when the nightmares began. Every night, the ticking of the watch echoed in my dreams, leading me down dark, twisted corridors that mirrored the distorted streets from that night. Shadows whispered secrets in a language I couldn't understand, and unease watched me from the darkness. The watch became my curse. Strange occurrences started to happen around me. Lights would flicker and die as I passed, and objects would move on their own. People began to avoid me, sensing something off. My once busy taxi now stood idle, the city seemingly avoiding my cursed presence. Desperate, I sought help. I visited mediums, priests, anyone who might understand the supernatural. But the watch was relentless. Its ticking grew louder each day, drowning out the sounds of the world, isolating me in a bubble of my own misfortune. One night, driven to the brink of insanity by the incessant ticking, I returned to the spot where the man had vanished. The fog was as thick as that night, and the world was eerily silent. I clutched the watch tightly, hoping for an end to the nightmare. As the clock struck midnight, the air around me shimmered, and the mysterious passenger appeared once more. His eyes were colder than ever, a smile playing on his lips that chilled me to the bone. "Why?" I asked, barely a whisper. He leaned closer, his breath icy against my skin. "You were chosen," he said, his voice a haunting melody. "To bear the watch is to bear the curse of time, forever a passenger on its endless journey." I begged him to take it back, to end the curse, but he merely laughed, a sound that echoed through the fog. "The watch chooses its keeper, and it chose you," he said, his form starting to fade. In a final act of desperation, I threw the watch at him. It passed through his vanishing form and landed on the ground, the ticking stopping abruptly. Silence enveloped me, the weight of the curse lifting. The man was gone, and so was the watch, leaving no trace behind. I stood there for a long time in the cold, silent night, free at last. But freedom came at a cost. The city no longer felt like home, its streets a constant reminder of that night. I left it all behind, seeking a new beginning away from the shadows of the past. But sometimes in the dead of night, I hear the faint ticking of a watch, and I wonder if the curse truly ended or if it merely waits, biding its time.